Have you ever felt like there's a secret language to human behavior? A hidden code influencing every decision you make, every emotion you feel, and every interaction you have? What if I told you that you've been living with a powerful operating system, your mind, without fully understanding its most fascinating quirks and profound truths? We all navigate a complex world, making sense of ourselves and others. Yet so much of what drives us operates beneath the surface, unseen, unheard, and often unacknowledged. Imagine unlocking insights that don't just explain why you do what you do, but how you can transform your reactions, your relationships, and ultimately, your life. This isn't about quick fixes or superficial tips. It's about a deep dive into the very fabric of human psychology, uncovering truths that have been shaping your reality, perhaps without your conscious awareness. Today, we're embarking on an extraordinary journey, a quest to reveal 25 truths about human psychology you never knew about yourself. Each truth is a window into the intricate workings of your mind, a secret key to understanding the subtle forces that guide your thoughts, feelings, and actions. From the surprising ways your memory plays tricks on you to the hidden biases that color your perceptions. We'll explore phenomena that are universally human yet uniquely personal in their impact. These aren't just academic concepts, they are living, breathing insights that will profoundly shift your mindset and perception of yourself and the world around you. Prepare to see yourself and everyone else in an entirely new light. Get ready to challenge your assumptions, embrace your complexities, and ultimately, unlock a deeper, more meaningful understanding of what it truly means to be human. This journey of self-discovery promises to be enlightening, perhaps a little unsettling at times, but undeniably transformative. By the end of this video, now, you won't just know more about psychology, you'll know more about you. Have you ever walked into a room, convinced that everyone immediately noticed that small stain on your shirt, or the slight stumble you made on the way in? Do you sometimes feel an overwhelming sense of self-consciousness, believing that every tiny imperfection or awkward moment is under intense scrutiny from those around you? It's a common experience, this feeling of being constantly observed, as if a literal spotlight is shining solely on you, highlighting every perceived flaw or misstep. This nagging sensation can lead to heightened anxiety, making us hesitant to speak up, try new things, or simply relax and be ourselves in social situations. But what if the intensity of that spotlight is largely a figment of your own imagination? What if the audience you perceive is far less attentive than you believe? This pervasive psychological phenomenon is known as the spotlight effect. It's our inherent tendency to overestimate the extent to which others are paying attention to our appearance, behavior, and even our internal states. We assume that our actions and characteristics are far more salient to others than they actually are. The truth is, while we are acutely aware of our own internal world and external presentation, most people are primarily focused on themselves. They're consumed by their own thoughts, their own perceived flaws, and their own anxieties about being observed. Think about it when you're in a conversation. Are you meticulously analyzing every detail of the other person's outfit? Or are you more focused on what you're going to say next, or how you're being perceived? The mechanism behind the spotlight effect is rooted in our egocentric bias. Our personal experiences, thoughts, and feelings are the center of our own universe, making it difficult to fully appreciate that others have their own equally complex and self-focused worlds. Our brains naturally prioritize information relevant to ourselves, leading to an exaggerated sense of our own prominence in the minds of others. This is further amplified by the fact that we have immediate and constant access to our own thoughts and actions. whereas we can only infer what others are thinking or noticing. We project our own intense self-awareness onto everyone else, mistakenly assuming they share the same level of focus on us. Psychologists have demonstrated this effect in various experiments, showing that people consistently overestimate how many observers notice things like embarrassing t-shirts or minor social faux pas. The consequences of the spotlight effect can be significant, subtly influencing our daily lives. On the one hand, it can fuel social anxiety, making us overly cautious and self-critical, hindering our willingness to take social risks or express ourselves authentically. We might avoid public speaking, shy away from asking questions, or decline opportunities simply because we fear intense judgment that isn't actually there. This can limit personal growth, stifle creativity, and prevent us from forming genuine connections. On the other hand, understanding this effect can be incredibly liberating. It highlights that the pressure we often feel isn't necessarily external. It's often self-imposed. Recognizing this can be a powerful step towards reducing self-consciousness and building greater confidence. So, how can you use this insight to your advantage or defend against its negative grip? The first step is simple awareness. Acknowledge that the spotlight effect is at play when you feel overly scrutinized. When you're feeling self-conscious, take a moment to consciously remind yourself that people are likely less focused on you than you think. Try to shift your perspective from being the observed to being the observer, recognizing that others are also preoccupied with their own internal worlds. Practice radical self-acceptance, understanding that minor imperfections are rarely noticed and even less frequently judged harshly by others. Challenge your assumptions by actively testing them next time you feel a minor flaw is glaringly obvious. Observe how others actually react or don't react. You'll likely find that your fears are largely unfounded. This realization can empower you to step out of your own head, embrace spontaneity, and engage more freely with the world around you. Remember, most people are too busy starring in their own movie to be critical viewers of yours. The takeaway is profound. Your perceived audience is far smaller and less critical than you believe. Liberate yourself from the imagined gaze and step into the authentic expression of who you are. Have you ever noticed how easily you find information that supports what you already believe? Almost as if the universe conspires to agree with you. It's a remarkably comforting feeling, isn't it? To have your existing viewpoints constantly validated. Think about the last time you had a strong opinion on a political issue, a health claim, or even just which smartphone brand is superior. Did you then find yourself gravitating towards news articles, social media posts, or conversations that echoed your stance, while subtly or not so subtly dismissing anything that challenged it? This isn't just a coincidence. It's a powerful and pervasive mental shortcut that shapes your perception of reality more than you realize. It can make you feel more certain, more informed, and more right. But it can also trap you in an intellectual echo chamber, limiting your understanding and growth. This fundamental human tendency is known as confirmation bias. It's our brain's predisposition to seek out, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or strengthens our pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Instead of being objective processors of information, our minds act more like diligent lawyers, selectively gathering evidence to support a case that's already been decided. We don't just passively receive information, we actively filter it through the lens of what we already hold true. This means we pay more attention to facts that align with our views. We interpret ambiguous evidence as supportive, and we're more likely to remember information that reinforces our existing convictions, even if contradictory evidence is equally or more compelling. The mechanism behind confirmation bias is deeply rooted in our cognitive architecture and our need for cognitive consistency. Our brains crave order and predictability. Inconsistencies and challenges to our beliefs can create mental discomfort, known as cognitive dissonance. To alleviate this discomfort, our minds unconsciously employ strategies to maintain a coherent and consistent worldview. It's less effortful to reinforce existing neural pathways than to forge new ones by critically evaluating disconfirming evidence. Furthermore, our desire to feel intelligent, informed, and part of a like-minded group also plays a role. Surrounding ourselves with affirming information provides a sense of security and belonging, while challenging our core beliefs can feel threatening, almost like an attack on our identity. The internet and social media, with their personalized algorithms, have become powerful amplifiers of this bias, creating filter bubbles and echo chambers that constantly feed us information we're likely to agree with. The consequences of confirmation bias are far-reaching and can impact every facet of your life. On a personal level, it can lead to stubbornness and closed-mindedness, preventing you from learning new things or adapting to changing circumstances. In relationships, it can cause misunderstandings and conflict, as you might misinterpret your partner's actions or words to confirm a negative assumption you already hold. In professional settings, it can lead to poor decision-making, as leaders or teams might ignore critical data that contradicts a favored strategy. Politically, it exacerbates polarization, making rational discourse incredibly difficult as opposing sides only consume and believe information that validates their own stance. Critically, it can prevent self-correction, stopping us from recognizing our own flaws or mistakes if acknowledging them would challenge a deeply held belief about ourselves. So, how do you mitigate the influence of confirmation bias and escape its restrictive echo chamber? The first step is cultivating intellectual humility, acknowledging that your beliefs, no matter how strongly held, are fallible and open to revision. Actively seek out information that challenges your existing views, even if it feels uncomfortable. This is often called devil's advocate thinking or falsification. Instead of trying to prove yourself right, try to prove yourself wrong. Engage in respectful dialogue with people who hold different opinions, not to convert them, but to genuinely understand their perspective. When consuming information, ask yourself, am I looking for reasons to agree on, or am I open to being challenged? Practice the steel manning technique, where you articulate the strongest possible version of an opposing argument before you try to counter it. By consciously exposing yourself to diverse viewpoints and critically evaluating all evidence, rather than just confirmatory data, you can broaden your understanding, make more informed decisions, and foster intellectual growth. This isn't about abandoning your beliefs, it's about making them stronger, more resilient, and more thoroughly examined. The powerful takeaway here is that truth isn't always comfortable. Growth lies beyond your echo chamber. Consciously seek disconfirming evidence to truly understand the world and yourself. This perplexing phenomenon is known as the backfire effect. It describes a situation where, when people are presented with evidence that contradicts their beliefs, especially deeply held ones, they can actually end up believing their original, often incorrect position more strongly than before. Instead of updating their views in light of new information, their brains double down, reinforcing their existing cognitive structures. It's as if the contradictory information acts as a threat, triggering a defensive mechanism that strengthens the very belief it was meant to challenge. This isn't about ignoring the facts, it's about actively rejecting them and, in doing so, becoming even more committed to the alternative. The mechanism behind the backfire effect is complex. weaving together several psychological principles. Firstly, it ties into cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we experience when holding conflicting beliefs. When confronted with disconfirming evidence, our brain tries to reduce this dissonance. Instead of changing the original, often emotionally comforting belief, it's easier to discredit the new, challenging information. Secondly, our identity and self-worth are often deeply intertwined with our beliefs. If a belief is central to our sense of self, group affiliation, or moral compass, challenging that belief feels like a personal attack. This triggers an emotional rather than rational response, leading to motivated reasoning where we selectively interpret information to protect our self-perception. Finally, fluency and familiarity play a role. Deeply ingrained beliefs are highly accessible in our minds. New, contradictory information requires more cognitive effort to process and integrate, making it less fluent and therefore less readily accepted. The brain seeks efficiency, and reinforcing existing pathways is often the path of least resistance, especially when emotional stakes are high. The consequences of the backfire effect are profound, contributing significantly to polarization and misinformation in society. In political discourse, it means that simply presenting facts to someone who holds opposing views can be not only ineffective, but actually counterproductive, solidifying their stance. In personal relationships, attempting to fact-check a loved one's emotionally held belief can lead to greater friction and resentment, rather than understanding. It makes it incredibly challenging to change minds on critical issues like climate change, vaccinations, or even historical events, because rational arguments alone are often insufficient and can even be detrimental. It highlights the limitations of a purely logical approach to persuasion when dealing with beliefs rooted in emotion or identity. So how can you navigate the treacherous waters of the backfire effect? Whether you're trying to genuinely persuade others or ensure you're not falling victim to it yourself? Firstly, recognize that confronting deeply held beliefs head-on with pure facts is often ineffective. Instead, focus on building rapport and trust first. People are more open to new ideas from those they respect and feel connected to. Secondly, instead of presenting facts as a challenge, try using curiosity and open-ended questions to encourage self-reflection. Ask what makes you say that, or have you considered this perspective done rather than you're wrong, here's why. Thirdly, appeal to shared values and common ground before introducing potentially conflicting information. Frame your message in a way that aligns with their existing worldview or identity, rather than threatening it. For self-protection, cultivate intellectual humility and actively seek out diverse perspectives, even those that make you uncomfortable. When you encounter information that contradicts something you strongly believe, resist the immediate urge to dismiss it. Instead, pause. Consider why you're feeling resistant and genuinely evaluate the evidence with an open mind. Be willing to admit when you might be wrong. True strength lies in the ability to update your beliefs based on new information, not in clinging stubbornly to outdated ones. The powerful takeaway here is that logic alone rarely wins when emotions are involved. Seek connection, not just correction, to truly open minds. Imagine you're offered a choice, a guaranteed gain of $100 or a 50% chance to win $200 and a 50% chance to win nothing. Most people would opt for the guaranteed $100. Now, consider a different scenario. You're faced with a guaranteed loss of $100 or a 50% chance to lose $200 and a 50% chance to lose nothing. Here, most people would choose the gamble, hoping to avoid any loss at all, even if it means risking a greater one. Why do our preferences shift so dramatically when faced with gains versus losses? This seemingly irrational behavior reveals a deep-seated truth about how our minds value what we possess and how powerfully the fear of deprivation can influence our every decision, often without us even realizing it. This fundamental psychological bias is known as loss aversion. It describes our powerful tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains. Simply put, the pain of losing something feels significantly more intense than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. For example, the pain you feel from losing $100 is generally perceived as much greater than the joy you'd experience from finding $100. Research suggests that losses are psychologically twice as powerful as gains. This isn't just about money. It applies to anything we value: time, opportunities, relationships, status, or even an idea we hold. Once we perceive something as ours, its value dramatically increases in our minds, making us irrationally protective of it. The mechanism behind loss aversion is rooted in our evolutionary history and the way our brains are wired to prioritize survival. From an evolutionary perspective, avoiding threats and preserving resources was critical for survival. Losing a resource, food, shelter, safety posed a direct threat, while gaining a new one, though beneficial, wasn't as immediately critical. Our brains developed a stronger emotional response to potential losses, triggering a more urgent and powerful reaction. Neuroscientifically, studies show that different neural circuits are activated when processing gains versus losses, with loss processing often activating areas associated with fear and negative emotions more intensely. This deep-seated fear of loss explains why we often cling to failing investments, maintain unhealthy relationships, or stick with suboptimal choices simply to avoid the perceived pain of giving them up. It's a powerful and often unconscious driver of human behavior, influencing everything from our financial decisions to our personal habits. The consequences of loss aversion are widespread and can profoundly impact your life, often leading to decisions that are not in your best long-term interest. In finance, it contributes to the disposition effect, where investors hold on to losing stocks for too long, hoping to break even, and sell winning stocks too soon to lock in gains, fearing potential loss. In marketing, businesses exploit this by framing offers in terms of what you'll lose if you don't act, rather than what you'll gain if you do a job. Don't miss out so much instead of get this great deal. In personal goal setting, it can make us overly cautious, preventing us from taking calculated risks that could lead to significant rewards. Because the potential pain of failure looms larger than the potential joy of success, it can also trap us in suboptimal situations, like staying in a job you dislike because the fear of losing your current salary or security outweighs the potential benefit of a new opportunity. So, how can you recognize and counteract the powerful grip of loss aversion? The key is to consciously reframe situation, and when faced with a decision involving potential losses, try to shift your perspective to focus on the opportunity costs of not taking action, or the potential gains you might be missing out on. Instead of asking, "What will I lose if I make this change?" ask, "What will I gain if I make this change? And what will I lose if I don't?" For example, when considering leaving a job, instead of dwelling on the loss of your current income, focus on the potential for new growth, better work-life balance, or increased income in a different role. Practice thinking in terms of net outcomes rather than isolated gains or losses. When evaluating investments or projects, force yourself to consider all options, including cutting your losses, and focus on the future potential rather than past sunk costs. Develop a mindset that views change and calculated risks not as threats of loss, but as opportunities for growth. Remember that sometimes, The greatest loss is the opportunity you never seized due to fear. The profound takeaway is this: the pain of losing is often an illusion of the mind. Focus on what you gain by embracing change and letting go. Have you ever walked into a store and seen an item originally priced at $500 now on sale for $250 and thought what a fantastic deal it was, even if you never would have considered paying $250 for it otherwise? Or perhaps during a negotiation, the first offer made, whether high or low, seems to subtly dictate the entire discussion that follows, pulling all subsequent counteroffers towards it. This isn't just clever marketing or skillful negotiation. It's a powerful psychological trick that your brain plays on itself, using initial information as a disproportionately influential reference point. It can make you overpay, undervalue, or misjudge, all because of an arbitrary starting figure that sticks in your mind like a stubborn anchor. This pervasive cognitive bias is known as the anchoring bias. It's our tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions, particularly when that information is numerical. Once an anchor is set, subsequent judgments are made by adjusting away from that anchor. But typically, these adjustments are insufficient, meaning our final estimate or decision remains biased towards the initial figure. Even if we know the anchor is irrelevant or random, our minds still struggle to fully disregard its influence. It's as if the first number we encounter becomes a gravitational center, pulling our thoughts and assessments into its orbit. The mechanism behind anchoring bias is tied to how our brains process information and make estimations, especially under uncertainty. When faced with an unknown value or an ambiguous decision, our minds seek a starting point, a reference. The first piece of information presented, regardless of its true relevance, often becomes that initial reference. From there, our brains engage in a process called anchoring and adjustment. We adjust our estimate away from the anchor. But this adjustment process is often insufficient. We stop adjusting once we reach a plausible range, even if that plausible range is still heavily skewed by the initial anchor. Furthermore, anchors can subtly prime our minds, making us more likely to recall information or generate arguments consistent with the anchor's value, further reinforcing its influence. This means that an initial high price might make us think of the item as premium, even if it isn't, simply because our brain is primed to consider higher values. The consequences of anchoring bias are vast and permeate many aspects of life, from financial decisions to social judgments. In sales and marketing, it's widely exploited. An artificially high original price makes a discounted price seem like a steal. In salary negotiations, the first offer often sets the range for the entire discussion. Making a strong, well-researched initial offer can significantly benefit you. In legal settings, the initial demand for damages can influence the final award, even in everyday situations, like estimating the cost of a renovation. An initial quote can anchor your expectations, making subsequent higher quotes seem exorbitant and lower ones seem suspiciously cheap, even if the latter are more realistic. It can lead to poor judgments because our assessments are skewed by an irrelevant or manipulative starting point, preventing us from objectively evaluating the true value or situation. So, how can you counteract the insidious influence of anchoring bias and make more independent, rational decisions? The first step is awareness. Recognize that anchors are always present, whether explicitly stated or subtly implied, and consciously challenge their validity. Before entering any negotiation or making a significant purchase, do your own independent research to establish your own realistic value or range before any anchor is presented to you. This pre-computed value can serve as your internal counter-anchor, When an anchor is presented, actively question its relevance. Is this number truly based on objective value, or is it an arbitrary starting point? Consider extreme possibilities to loosen the anchor's grip. For example, if someone offers a high price, think about how low you could possibly get it and how high it could go to expand your mental range. In negotiations, consider making the first offer yourself if you've done your homework, as this allows you to set a favorable anchor. If someone else sets an unfavorable anchor, you can explicitly re-anchor the discussion by stating your own well-reasoned initial figure and clearly explaining your rationale, thereby attempting to shift the focus. By consciously decoupling your judgment from initial arbitrary numbers, you empower yourself to make decisions based on true value and objective assessment. The profound takeaway is this: the first number isn't always the true number. Break free from its grip by independently valuing your choices. Section 7, Availability Heuristic. The easily recalled truth. Have you ever found yourself disproportionately worried about something you just saw on the news? Like a plane crash, even though you know statistically driving is far more dangerous. Or perhaps you overestimate the prevalence of a particular disease because you know someone who recently had it. It feels like your mind is playing a trick on you, making vivid, easily recalled examples feel more common or likely than they truly are. This isn't a flaw in your intelligence. It's a fundamental shortcut your brain uses to make quick judgments, often leading you to perceive reality based on how easily information comes to mind, rather than its true statistical probability. This common cognitive shortcut is known as the availability heuristic. It's our mental tendency to estimate the likelihood or frequency of an event, or the prevalence of a characteristic, based on how easily examples or instances come to mind. If something is easy to recall because it's vivid, recent, emotionally charged, or frequently discussed, we tend to overestimate its probability or significance. Conversely, if something is difficult to recall, we underestimate it. Our brains prioritize information that is readily available in memory, using it as a proxy for actual frequency or importance, even when this can lead to significant biases and misjudgments. The mechanism behind the availability heuristic is rooted in the brain's efficiency-seeking nature. Our cognitive resources are finite, and making exhaustive and statistically accurate calculations for every decision would be overwhelming and slow. So, the brain uses heuristics, or mental shortcuts, to quickly assess situations. Information that is more accessible in memory is often, but not always, more frequent or important. For example, if you hear about a particular type of car breaking down often, it might actually be unreliable. So recalling those instances is a good shortcut. However, when vividness, like a dramatic news report, or recency, something that just happened, makes something easy to recall, even if it's rare, our brain still gives it undue weight. Our brains aren't perfectly rational statistical machines. They are influenced by the emotional impact and ease of retrieval of information, leading to a skewed perception of reality. The consequences of the availability heuristic are widespread and can lead to significant errors in judgment and decision-making across various domains. In personal health, it might lead you to worry excessively about rare diseases you've heard about, while neglecting common but less dramatic health risks. In business, it can cause managers to overestimate the success of a new product based on a few memorable positive reviews, while overlooking a larger body of neutral or negative feedback. In risk assessment, people often overestimate the likelihood of sensational events like terrorist attacks or natural disasters and underestimate the likelihood of more mundane but statistically common risks like heart disease or car accidents. It also influences our biases and stereotypes if we can easily recall negative examples of a particular group. We might overestimate the prevalence of those traits within the entire group. This heuristic can fuel irrational fears and poor allocation of resources, both personal and societal. So, how can you counter the often misleading influence of the availability heuristic and make more balanced, data-driven decisions? The first step is conscious awareness. Recognize when your judgments might be swayed by how easily examples come to mind. When forming an opinion or assessing a risk, actively seek out objective data, statistics, and a broader range of evidence, rather than relying solely on anecdotal or vivid examples. For example, if you're worried about flying, look up actual aviation safety statistics rather than dwelling on news reports of crashes. Challenge your initial gut reaction by asking, what information am I not easily recalling? What might be less dramatic but statistically more significant? Engage in disconfirming information search, actively looking for evidence that would contradict your initial, easily available impression. Consider the base rates. What is the actual prevalence of this event or characteristic in the larger population? By consciously broadening your information intake beyond what is immediately accessible and emotionally salient, you can move towards more accurate and less biased assessments of the world around you. The powerful takeaway is this: the loudest information isn't always the most common. Seek true data to escape your memory's vivid illusions. Section 8. Sunk cost fallacy. Throwing good money after bad. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you continue to pour time, money, or effort into something, even when it's clearly not working out? Perhaps you've kept watching a terrible movie because you already paid for the ticket, or continued a failing business venture because you've invested so much into it, even though new, better opportunities have emerged. It's an almost irresistible urge to keep going, to see it through, despite the mounting evidence that you should cut your losses and move on. This irrational persistence, driven by what you've already invested, is a powerful and deceptive force that can trap you in unrewarding paths and prevent you from making smart, forward-looking decisions. This common cognitive trap is known as the sunk cost fallacy. It's our irrational inclination to continue investing in an endeavor because of resources, time, money, effort, emotion already expended, even when those resources are irrecoverable, sunk, and continuing the endeavor is clearly not beneficial or even detrimental. We mistakenly believe that by investing more, we can somehow recover the sunk costs, or that stopping now would mean all that previous investment was wasted. In reality, sunk costs are gone forever, and they should not influence rational future decisions. A rational decision focuses only on future costs and benefits, not past expenditures. The mechanism behind the sunk cost fallacy is rooted in several psychological factors. Firstly, it's closely tied to loss aversion, which we discussed earlier. The idea of letting go of something we've already invested in feels like a loss, and the pain of that perceived loss outweighs the potential future benefits of stopping. We'd rather risk more to try and avoid the pain of acknowledging a past failure or waste. Secondly, it's influenced by our desire for consistency and avoidance of cognitive dissonance. If we've committed resources to something, abandoning it creates a mental conflict. Was my initial decision to invest wrong? Am I admitting failure? To avoid this uncomfortable feeling, we persist, often rationalizing our continued investment. Thirdly, there's the human tendency towards optimism bias and the just one more try mentality. Especially when we are personally invested in the outcome, we tend to believe that with just a little more effort, the tide will turn, and our previous investments will finally pay off, despite clear indicators to the contrary. The consequences of the sunk cost fallacy are pervasive and can lead to significant detriment in many areas of life. In business, companies continue to fund failing projects, products, or even entire divisions simply because too much money has already been spent, rather than pivoting to more promising ventures. In personal finance, individuals hold on to depreciating assets or losing investments, hoping they will recover instead of selling and reinvesting elsewhere. In relationships, people may stay in unfulfilling or even toxic partnerships for years because of the time invested, rather than acknowledging the situation is unsustainable and moving on. It can also affect government spending, military decisions, and even daily choices like finishing a meal you don't enjoy simply because you paid for it. This fallacy prevents us from adapting, learning from mistakes, and pursuing better alternatives, essentially trapping us in past choices. So, how can you liberate yourself from the powerful grip of the sunk cost fallacy and make decisions based on future potential, not past investments? The key is to consciously separate past costs from future decisions. When evaluating a situation, ask yourself, if I hadn't already invested anything, would I still make this same choice going forward? This thought experiment helps to reset your perspective and focus solely on the costs and benefits from this point onward. Recognize that sunk costs are gone. They are irrecoverable. The money, time, or effort you've already spent cannot be retrieved by continuing down a bad path. Practice an opportunity cost mindset. What are you missing out on by continuing this failing endeavor? What better things could you be doing with your remaining resources? In a business context, assign a devil's advocate to challenge projects based purely on their future viability, ignoring past investments. In personal life, practice setting clear exit strategies or stop-loss points before you even begin a venture, whether it's an investment, a project, or even a book you're reading. This pre-commitment helps you make rational decisions when emotions might otherwise sway you. The power lies in letting go of the past to embrace a more prosperous future. The profound takeaway is this: your past investments are not a chain to your future. Cut your losses to open doors to better opportunities. Section 9. The Dunning-Kruger Effect, Unaware Incompetence. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed utterly convinced of their own expertise in a particular area, despite clear evidence to the contrary? Or, perhaps, have you ever felt surprisingly confident about a new skill you just picked up, only to realize much later how little you truly knew? This isn't just arrogance or false modesty. It's a fascinating and often humbling cognitive bias that reveals a peculiar blind spot in human self-assessment. It highlights how our perception of our own competence can be wildly inaccurate, often leading to overconfidence when we know very little, and surprising self-doubt as we actually learn more. This intriguing psychological phenomenon is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a cognitive bias in which people with low ability at a particular task or in a particular area of knowledge tend to overestimate their own competence significantly. Conversely, highly competent individuals often underestimate their relative competence compared to others, sometimes leading to imposter syndrome. In essence, those who know the least are often the most confident, while those who know the most are keenly aware of the vastness of what they don't know. It's a double burden for the incompetent. Not only are they unskilled, but they are also too unskilled to recognize their own lack of skill. The mechanism behind the Dunning-Kruger effect lies in the very nature of competence itself. To accurately assess one's own skill level in a domain, one needs a certain level of skill in that domain. For example, to know if you're a good chess player, you need to understand chess rules, strategies, and the skill level of other players. People who are genuinely incompetent lack the metacognitive ability, the ability to think about one's own thinking required to recognize their own errors or shortcomings. They don't have the necessary knowledge or skill to identify what constitutes competence in that area. So they unknowingly operate with an inflated view of their own capabilities. As people begin to gain more knowledge and skill, they also gain the capacity for self-criticism and a more realistic understanding of the complexity of the subject, leading to a temporary dip in confidence, the valley of despair, before eventually rising to accurate confidence with true mastery. The consequences of the Dunning-Kruger effect are significant, impacting learning, decision-making, and interpersonal interactions. In professional settings, it can lead to poor performance reviews, stalled career growth, and even dangerous outcomes if an overconfident, unskilled individual is placed in a position of responsibility. In personal development, it can prevent individuals from seeking necessary feedback or engaging in true learning, as they mistakenly believe they have nothing left to learn. It contributes to the spread of misinformation, as highly confident but uninformed individuals may passionately advocate for incorrect views. In everyday life, it explains why some people might confidently offer unsolicited advice on topics they know little about, or why some struggling students genuinely believe they are performing well. Ultimately, it can hinder both individual and collective progress by obscuring genuine knowledge gaps and promoting unfounded certainty. So, how can you navigate the Dunning-Kruger effect, both to accurately assess yourself and to deal with others who might be under its influence? For self-improvement, the antidote is continuous learning and genuine feedback. Actively seek out constructive criticism from knowledgeable and trusted sources. Embrace a growth mindset, understanding that expertise is a journey, not a destination. When you're learning something new, be wary of initial surges of confidence. This peak of Mount Stupid is often the first sign of the effect. Instead, push yourself to learn more deeply, exposing yourself to the nuances and complexities that initially eluded you. This will naturally lead to a more accurate and perhaps more humble assessment of your abilities. When dealing with others, exercise patience and skepticism when encountering extreme confidence, especially from those who lack a clear track record. Instead of directly challenging their competence, focus on asking clarifying questions, providing objective data, and encouraging them to seek diverse perspectives. Foster an environment where learning and acknowledging knowledge gaps are celebrated, not shamed. The profound takeaway is this: true wisdom often starts with knowing how little you know. Beware the confident ignorance of unexamined belief. Imagine witnessing an emergency: someone collapses on a busy street, or a car accident occurs on a crowded highway. What would you do? Most of us would instinctively say we'd rush to help. Yet, tragically, there are countless documented cases where individuals in distress were ignored or only belatedly assisted, even when many people were present. Why do large groups sometimes stand by, seemingly paralyzed, while a single individual might step forward? This puzzling phenomenon, where the presence of others strangely diminishes our sense of personal responsibility, reveals a surprising truth about human behavior in a crisis sometimes. The more people around, the less likely anyone is to act. This perplexing social psychological phenomenon is known as the bystander effect. It's the counterintuitive observation that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely any one of them is to provide help. It's not about apathy or callousness. It's a subtle but powerful psychological diffusion of responsibility that occurs in group settings, leaving individuals feeling less accountable for action. Each person assumes someone else will, or should, intervene, leading to a collective inaction where everyone waits for someone else to make the first move. The mechanism behind the bystander effect is primarily explained by two intertwined psychological processes: diffusion of responsibility and pluralistic ignorance. Diffusion of responsibility means that when multiple people are present, the perceived burden of intervening is spread out among them. Each individual feels less personally responsible for taking action because others are available to do so. It's a subtle mental calculation. Why should I act when they could? Pluralistic ignorance occurs when individuals look to others to define the situation. If no one else is reacting, we assume that either no emergency is happening or that intervention isn't necessary. This is especially true in ambiguous situations. If everyone is looking at everyone else for cues and no one is acting, everyone mistakenly concludes that inaction is the appropriate response, even if internally they are concerned. Finally, evaluation apprehension also plays a role. Individuals may be hesitant to intervene for fear of making a mistake, looking foolish, or misinterpreting the situation in front of others. The consequences of the bystander effect are severe, often leading to tragic outcomes in real-life emergencies. From assaults to medical emergencies, countless critical situations have escalated because potential helpers were paralyzed by the presence of others. It impacts workplace dynamics where issues might go unaddressed if everyone assumes someone else will speak up. It can also manifest in less dramatic but still harmful ways, such as a student being bullied while classmates stand by silently, or a social injustice being ignored by a community. The effect highlights a critical flaw in human social psychology: our inherent group instincts, which often lead to cooperation, can paradoxically hinder individual initiative when help is urgently needed, turning collective presence into collective inaction. So, how can you combat the bystander effect, both to ensure you act when needed and to increase the likelihood of others acting? The first and most crucial step is awareness, understanding that this effect exists. If you find yourself in a situation where help is needed and others are present, consciously recognize the potential for diffusion of responsibility. As a potential helper, take direct personal responsibility. Instead of waiting, be the first to act, or at least be the first to visibly assess the situation and ask for help. If you are the person in need of help, explicitly counteract the effect by pointing to a specific individual and giving them a direct command. Make eye contact and say something like, "You in the red shirt, please call 911 Doman," or "You, sir, help me move this." This singularizes responsibility and overcomes pluralistic ignorance by clearly identifying someone as the helper. As a bystander, if you see others hesitant, break the spell of inaction by speaking up. Is everyone seeing this? Do we need to call for help? By making the emergency clear and assigning responsibility, you can transform a group of passive onlookers into active responders. Your decisive action can be the cue that empowers others to overcome their psychological inertia. The powerful takeaway is this: don't let the crowd be your excuse. Your individual action is powerful enough to break the spell of collective inaction. Section 11. Fundamental attribution error: judging others harshly. Have you ever cut someone off in traffic, only to immediately rationalize your action? I'm late for an important meeting, and while simultaneously fuming at someone else who did the same thing to you, assuming they're just a rude, aggressive driver? Or have you dismissed a colleague's poor performance as laziness, while attributing your own mistakes to external factors like a lack of resources or tight deadlines? We constantly explain people's behaviors, both our own and others, but we often do so through a remarkably biased lens. This pervasive cognitive bias causes us to judge others far more harshly, focusing on their character, while giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt. attributing our own failings to circumstances beyond our control. This common cognitive bias is known as the fundamental attribution error (FAE). It is our systematic tendency to overemphasize personality-based explanations for others' observed behavior while underestimating the role of situational factors. Conversely, when it comes to our own behavior, especially negative or undesirable actions, we tend to attribute them to external situational circumstances rather than to our inherent character or disposition. In essence, we see others' actions as a reflection of who they are, but our own actions as a product of our environment. It's a powerful shortcut our brains use that often leads to unfair judgments and a lack of empathy. The mechanism behind the fundamental attribution error is complex, but several factors contribute to it. Firstly, when observing others, their behavior is salient. It's what we see directly. Their internal states, intentions, and the external situational pressures they face are often invisible to us. Our brains take the path of least resistance, attributing the visible behavior to stable internal traits. We don't have enough information or don't take the time to consider their context. Secondly, there's a perceptual asymmetry when we observe others. We are focused on them. When we act ourselves, we are focused on the situation around us and our response to it. This difference in focus leads to different attributions. Finally, there's a self-serving bias at play, particularly when attributing our own negative behaviors. Attributing our failures to external factors protects our self-esteem and maintains a positive self-image, whereas attributing others' failures to their character reinforces our own sense of superiority or moral correctness. The consequences of the fundamental attribution error are far-reaching, impacting personal relationships, professional interactions, and broader societal issues. In interpersonal relationships, it can lead to constant misunderstandings and resentment. If you always attribute your partner's forgetfulness to their inherent disorganization rather than their overwhelming workload, conflict is inevitable. In the workplace, managers might unfairly blame employees' poor performance on a lack of motivation, overlooking systemic issues or resource deficits. In legal settings, jurors might too readily attribute a defendant's actions to their character without fully appreciating the situational pressures. On a societal level, it contributes to victim blaming and a lack of empathy for disadvantaged groups, as we might attribute their struggles to personal failings rather than systemic inequalities or challenging circumstances. This bias hinders our ability to truly understand others, fostering division and unfair judgment. So, how can you mitigate the effects of the fundamental attribution error and cultivate a more empathetic and accurate understanding of human behavior? The first step is conscious awareness. Pause before judging others. When someone does something you disapprove of, actively force yourself to consider plausible situational explanations. Ask, what external factors might have influenced their behavior? Or, what would I do if I were in their exact circumstances? Practice perspective taking. Try to mentally step into their shoes and imagine their day, their pressures, their background. This active effort to seek out situational information can significantly reduce the bias. For yourself, when reflecting on your own mistakes, resist the urge to solely blame external factors. Engage in self-reflection to consider how your own choices, habits, or internal states might have contributed. By consistently challenging your initial dispositional attributions for others and considering dispositional factors for yourself, you can develop a more nuanced, fair, and empathetic understanding of human action. Remember that everyone is navigating their own complex set of circumstances, just like you. The profound takeaway is this: don't judge a book by its cover. Look beyond personality to the unseen forces shaping every human story. Have you ever met someone new and, within minutes, formed a glowing impression of them based on just one positive trait? Perhaps they're incredibly articulate, or very attractive, or exceptionally charming. And then, almost unconsciously, you found yourself attributing other positive qualities to them. Even without any evidence, you might assume they are also intelligent, kind, and trustworthy, simply because of that initial spark. Conversely, a single negative trait, like a perceived rudeness or a less than stellar appearance, can lead you to unfairly assume a person is also incompetent, dishonest, or unfriendly. This powerful mental shortcut demonstrates how our initial judgments, often based on superficial information, cast a disproportionate shadow or light over our entire perception of an individual. This common cognitive bias is known as the halo effect. It's our tendency for a positive or negative impression of a person in one area to influence our feelings and thoughts about that person in other, unrelated areas. If we perceive someone as having a desirable characteristic, the halo, stom, we tend to assume they possess other desirable characteristics, even if there's no logical connection. Similarly, a single negative trait, a horn, can cause us to attribute a host of other negative qualities to them. This bias creates a cognitive shortcut, allowing us to form quick, generalized impressions about people rather than evaluating each of their traits independently and objectively. The mechanism behind the halo effect is rooted in our brain's desire for cognitive consistency and efficiency. Our minds prefer to create a coherent and unified impression of others. Once we've labeled someone positively or negatively in one aspect, it's easier for our brain to fill in the gaps with consistent information, rather than holding conflicting views or expending more effort on detailed, trait-by-trait analysis. This is particularly strong when the initial trait is something socially desirable, like physical attractiveness or perceived confidence, which often carries a positive social value. Research has shown, for instance, that attractive people are often perceived as more intelligent, sociable, and competent, even in professional contexts. This is not a conscious decision. Rather, it's an automatic and often unconscious generalization that simplifies our social judgments, for better or worse. The consequences of the halo effect are widespread and can significantly impact personal, professional, and societal interactions. In hiring, an interviewer might unconsciously favor a charismatic candidate, assuming they are also more competent and diligent, overlooking more qualified but less outwardly impressive applicants. In education, a teacher's initial impression of a student's neatness or politeness might unfairly influence their assessment of that student's intelligence or effort. In marketing and branding, companies leverage this by associating their products with attractive models or trusted celebrities, hoping the positive feelings transfer to the product itself. In legal settings, attractive defendants may receive lighter sentences. More broadly, it perpetuates stereotypes and biases, as a single perceived trait can trigger a cascade of unfair assumptions about an entire group of people, hindering objective evaluation and fostering prejudice. So, how can you become more aware of the halo effect and prevent it from clouding your judgment, both about others and about yourself? The first step is conscious recognition. Acknowledge that your initial positive or negative feelings towards someone might be disproportionately influencing your overall assessment. When forming an opinion, practice trait-by-trait evaluation instead of forming a holistic judgment. Break down your assessment into specific or independent qualities. For example, when interviewing someone, assess their communication skills, then their technical skills, then their teamwork ability, trying to separate each assessment from the others. Challenge your assumptions if you think someone is great because they're friendly. Ask yourself, what specific evidence do I have that they are also reliable or intelligent? Actively seek out disconfirming evidence or alternative explanations for their behavior. For self-protection, be aware that others might be judging you through a similar lens. Focus on presenting a well-rounded and authentic self, rather than relying on one striking trait to carry all the weight. By deliberately slowing down your judgment process and focusing on specific, observable behaviors rather than generalized impressions, you can develop a more nuanced, fair, and accurate understanding of individuals. The powerful takeaway is this: don't let one shine blind you to the whole picture. Judge individuals on their merits, not their initial sparkle. Section 13. Primacy and recency effects, memory's sticky ends. Have you ever gone to a job interview and spent ages crafting the perfect opening statement, hoping to make a powerful first impression? Or perhaps, after listening to a long list of instructions, you found yourself remembering the very first few steps and the very last few, while the middle seemed to blur into a fog. This isn't just random forgetfulness, it's your memory playing a fascinating trick, one that significantly influences what you retain, how you perceive information, and even how you evaluate experiences. Our minds have a peculiar way of giving preferential treatment to the beginning and end of a sequence, leaving the middle often overlooked and forgotten. These two powerful memory biases are known as the primacy effect and the recency effect. The primacy effect describes our tendency to recall information presented at the beginning of a list or sequence more accurately than information presented in the middle. The recency effect, on the other hand, describes our tendency to recall information presented at the end of a list or sequence more accurately than information presented in the middle. Together, they form a powerful duo, meaning that the beginning and end of an experience, a presentation, or a list are disproportionately memorable, while the middle often fades into the background. The mechanisms behind these effects are rooted in how our brains encode and retrieve information. The primacy effect is often attributed to the greater opportunity for rehearsal and transfer to long-term memory. When you first encounter information, your working memory has more capacity to process it deeply, repeat it, and consolidate it into long-term storage, as there's less information preceding it to compete for attention. The recency effect is primarily due to the information still being readily available in short-term or working memory. The most recently encountered items haven't yet had time to decay or be pushed out by new information. The items in the middle suffer because they are too far from the beginning to benefit from long-term memory encoding, and too far from the end to still be present in short-term memory when recall is required, leading to what's often called the asymptote of the serial position curve. The consequences of the primacy and recency effects are widespread, subtly influencing everything from learning and communication to social judgments and consumer behavior. In a presentation or speech, the audience is most likely to remember your opening remarks and your concluding summary, making these critical points for impactful messaging. In a negotiation, the first offer and the final concessions often carry disproportionate weight. In education, students may remember the first and last topics covered in a lecture more easily than those in the middle, impacting their overall understanding. Even in judging a series of experiences, like a vacation or a new product, our overall impression is often heavily skewed by how it started and how it ended, sometimes overlooking a less exciting but consistent middle. Businesses strategically use this by placing key features or memorable calls to action at the beginning and end of advertisements or product demonstrations. So, how can you leverage these memory biases for more effective communication and learning? or protect yourself from being unduly influenced by them. For effective communication, whether in a presentation, an argument, or an interview, strategically place your most important information or strongest arguments at the very beginning and the very end. This ensures they have the highest chance of being remembered and making a lasting impression. For the middle portion, use engaging storytelling, visual aids, or interactive elements to combat the middle slump and maintain attention. When learning, if you have a long list of items to memorize, break it down into smaller chunks, giving each chunk a beginning and an end to maximize recall. To protect yourself from being swayed when evaluating a series of facts or experiences, consciously force yourself to focus on the information in the middle. Don't let a strong opening or a catchy closing overshadow the substance in between. Take notes, review comprehensively, and consider the entirety of the information, rather than just the parts that naturally stick out. By understanding how your memory prioritizes information, you can strategically structure your messages for maximum impact and critically evaluate information received from others. The powerful takeaway is this: what comes first and last often sticks the most. Strategically craft your openings and closings for lasting impact. Section 14. Cognitive dissonance, the mind's quest for harmony. Have you ever found yourself doing or saying something that directly contradicts your own beliefs or values, and then immediately felt an uncomfortable mental tension? Perhaps you bought an expensive item you couldn't afford and then rationalized it by convincing yourself it was a necessary investment. Or maybe you argued passionately for a viewpoint you secretly disagreed with, and later found your actual opinion subtly shifting to align with what you'd publicly defended. This isn't just a sign of hypocrisy or weakness, it's a powerful psychological force at play, a fundamental drive within your mind to achieve internal consistency. Even if it means altering your perceptions, beliefs, or even memories to do so, this pervasive mental discomfort is known as cognitive dissonance. It's the psychological stress or mental unease experienced by an individual who simultaneously holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, or participates in an action that goes against one or more of their beliefs, ideas, or values. The mind finds this inconsistency uncomfortable and seeks to reduce this tension. To alleviate the dissonance, people often change one of the conflicting cognition's beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors. Add new cognitions, or alter the importance of the cognitions. The more significant the beliefs involved, or the greater the perceived personal responsibility for the inconsistency, the stronger the dissonance and the greater the drive to reduce it. The mechanism behind cognitive dissonance is rooted in our fundamental need for internal consistency and a coherent self-concept. Our brains are wired to perceive the world and ourselves in a consistent, logical manner. When confronted with an inconsistency, it creates a psychological pressure that motivates us to reduce it, much like hunger motivates us to eat. The brain doesn't like to hold contradictory ideas simultaneously. The ways we reduce dissonance are fascinating. We might change our attitude. I didn't really want that job anyway. Change our behavior. I'll start exercising tomorrow. Or add consonant cognitions. It's okay, I ate cake. I worked out really hard today. Sometimes, the most common and subtle way we reduce dissonance is by rationalizing or distorting our perceptions to make the inconsistent elements seem less contradictory or more acceptable. This automatic process helps us maintain a positive self-image and avoid facing uncomfortable truths about our choices or beliefs. The consequences of cognitive dissonance are far-reaching and can influence nearly every aspect of human decision-making and perception. It explains why people might stay in abusive relationships, rationalizing their partner's behavior to reduce the dissonance of staying, "They'll change." It's not that bad. It underlies consumer loyalty, where after a big purchase, people tend to focus on the positive aspects of their chosen product and downplay alternatives to avoid buyer's remorse. It's evident in political loyalty, where supporters of a particular candidate might dismiss credible negative information about them while amplifying minor criticisms of opponents. In personal habits, it's why smokers might rationalize their habit by saying everyone dies anyway or it calms my nerves. This drive for consistency, while often helping us function, can also lead to self-deception, resistance to change, and an inability to critically evaluate our own past decisions. So, how can you become aware of cognitive dissonance's influence and use it to your advantage, or at least prevent it from leading you to irrational conclusions? The first step is cultivating self-awareness and intellectual honesty. Be willing to confront uncomfortable inconsistencies within your own beliefs and behaviors. Instead of automatically rationalizing, pause and ask yourself, am I feeling uncomfortable because my actions contradict something I believe? What is the actual evidence? Practice mindfulness of your internal discomfort when faced with a choice or information that challenges your existing views. Use the discomfort as a signal to critically examine your thoughts, rather than immediately seeking to reduce the dissonance through rationalization. When trying to change a habit, instead of trying to force yourself, create dissonance by highlighting the direct contradiction between your desired identity, "I am a healthy person," and your current behavior, "I am eating junk food." This can be a powerful motivator for change. Conversely, if you want to persuade others, focus on creating mild dissonance by gently presenting information that subtly conflicts with their beliefs, allowing them to resolve it by shifting their own perspective, rather than directly challenging them, which can trigger strong defense mechanisms. The key is not to eliminate dissonance entirely, which is impossible, but to manage it constructively. The profound takeaway is this: your mind craves harmony. Embrace the discomfort of inconsistency to unlock true self-awareness and growth. Have you ever noticed how quickly people form loyalties to groups, whether it's a sports team, a political party, a professional association, or even just a shared hobby group? And along with that loyalty, have you observed a subtle or not-so-subtle tendency to view members of your own group more favorably, while simultaneously holding less positive or even negative views of those outside your group? This isn't necessarily about outright hatred. It's a fundamental aspect of human social psychology, an us versus them mentality that can emerge even from the most trivial distinctions. It profoundly shapes our perceptions, our trust, and our interactions, often leading to prejudice, discrimination, and a distorted view of those not in our immediate circle. This deeply ingrained social psychological phenomenon is known as in-group, out-group bias. It's our inherent tendency to favor members of our own social group, the in-group, over members of other social groups, the out-group. This favoritism manifests in various ways. We perceive in-group members as more diverse, intelligent, and trustworthy, while out-group members are often seen as more homogeneous, less trustworthy, and possess more negative traits. We're more likely to attribute positive actions by in-group members to their good character, and negative actions to external circumstances, while reversing this attribution for out-group members, similar to the fundamental attribution error. But applied to groups, this bias can arise from almost any basis of group identity, whether it's nationality, religion, race, gender, profession, or even which type of phone you own. The mechanism behind in-groups or out-group bias is deeply rooted in our evolutionary history and our need for belonging, identity, and security. For our ancestors, group cohesion was vital for survival. Belonging to a tribe meant protection and access to resources. Our brains developed mechanisms to quickly categorize people and identify those who were like us and therefore potentially trustworthy, versus others who might pose a threat or compete for resources. This automatic categorization is an efficient way for the brain to process complex social information. Furthermore, our self-esteem is often tied to the perceived status and value of our in-groups. By elevating our own group and subtly or overtly devaluing out-groups, we enhance our self-image and reinforce our sense of worth. Social identity theory posits that we derive a sense of pride and self-esteem from our group memberships, leading us to favor those groups and discriminate against others. The consequences of in-group or out-group bias are far-reaching and can be profoundly detrimental. From minor social awkwardness to severe societal conflict, it fuels prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination in various forms, including racism, sexism, and xenophobia. In political discourse, it deepens polarization, making compromise and constructive dialogue incredibly difficult as opposing sides view each other with suspicion and distrust. In the workplace, it can lead to hiring biases, unfair promotions, and a lack of diversity, as decision-makers unconsciously favor candidates who share their background or identity. Even in seemingly trivial contexts, like fan rivalries, it can lead to irrational hostility. This bias hinders empathy, distorts objective judgment, and creates barriers between people, preventing genuine understanding and cooperation on a larger scale. So, how can you become aware of this powerful us versus them tendency and actively work to overcome its divisive influence? The first and most crucial step is conscious recognition. Acknowledge that this bias is a natural human tendency that you, too, possess. Actively seek out opportunities for intergroup contact where individuals from different groups can interact on an equal footing, especially when working towards a common goal. This can break down stereotypes and foster empathy by revealing shared humanity. Practice perspective-taking. Actively try to understand the experiences and viewpoints of people from outgroups, imagining yourself in their shoes. Challenge your own assumptions and stereotypes when you catch yourself generalizing about an entire group. Focus on superordinate identities. Emphasize shared goals or broader identities that transcend smaller group divisions. We are all citizens. We are all humans, rather than focusing solely on what differentiates groups. Cultivate an individualistic approach to people, striving to evaluate each person based on their unique merits and character, rather than applying generalized group labels. By actively challenging your automatic tendency to categorize and judge based on group affiliation, you can foster greater empathy, understanding, and cooperation in your own life and contribute to a more inclusive world. The profound takeaway is this: your mind creates tribes, but your humanity transcends them. Seek common ground to bridge the divides of us versus them. Have you ever walked into a supermarket aisle overflowing with dozens of different brands and varieties of a simple product like jam or toothpaste, and instead of feeling empowered by the options, you felt completely overwhelmed? Or perhaps you've spent hours scrolling through streaming services trying to pick a movie only to end up watching nothing at all because the sheer volume of choices felt paralyzing. We live in an age that champions choice as the ultimate freedom. Yet paradoxically, an abundance of options can often lead to increased anxiety, decision paralysis, and even lower satisfaction with the decisions we finally do make. It turns out that too much of a good thing, when it comes to choice, can actually be detrimental to our well-being. This counterintuitive psychological phenomenon is known as the paradox of choice. It states that while some choice is good and essential for well-being, an excessive number of choices can lead to a decrease in happiness and an increase in decision-making difficulty. Instead of leading to greater satisfaction, an overwhelming array of options can result in choice overload, cognitive paralysis, regret, and a phenomenon known as maximizer's regret, where individuals constantly second-guess their chosen option, wondering if they made the best choice among so many possibilities. It reveals that the human mind isn't designed to efficiently process an infinite number of alternatives, and our pursuit of the perfect choice can often leave us feeling worse off. The mechanism behind the paradox of choice is multifaceted. Firstly, cognitive overload. Our working memory has a limited capacity. When presented with too many options, our brains become overwhelmed trying to process and compare all the variables, leading to mental fatigue and decision paralysis. It simply takes too much mental effort. Secondly, opportunity costs. With more choices, the number of attractive alternatives not chosen increases, leading to a stronger sense of opportunity cost, the feeling of what you're missing out on by picking one option over others. This heightened awareness of foregone alternatives contributes to regret and dissatisfaction. Thirdly, it raises expectations. When there are countless options, we naturally assume that one of them must be perfect. This sets an impossibly high standard, making it almost certain that any chosen option will fall short of our inflated expectations, leading to disappointment and lower satisfaction. Finally, it exacerbates the feeling of personal responsibility. With fewer choices, if a decision goes poorly, we might blame external circumstances. With abundant choices, we feel entirely responsible for a suboptimal outcome, leading to self-blame and regret. The consequences of the paradox of choice are pervasive in modern life. In consumer behavior, it can lead to consumers abandoning purchases due to indecision, or experiencing buyer's remorse even after making a choice. In career paths, too many perceived options can lead to anxiety about making the wrong choice, or constantly second-guessing career decisions. In relationships, the endless dating app profiles can lead to a sense of perpetual search for a better option, hindering commitment and satisfaction. It can even affect personal well-being as people become paralyzed by choices in everything from what to eat for dinner to how to spend their free time. This paradox highlights how what seems like a benefit, more options, can actually become a psychological burden, diminishing our autonomy and contentment. So, how can you navigate the paradox of choice and find liberation in a world overflowing with options? The key is to shift from a maximizer mindset seeking the absolute best option to a satisficer mindset seeking an option that is good enough. Firstly, set clear criteria and limits before you even start looking. Define what you truly need and what is truly important, and then filter options based on those parameters. Secondly, reduce the number of choices you consider and instead of browse endlessly, commit to evaluating only a small, manageable number of options, e.g., the top 3-5. Use trusted recommendations or reputable filters to narrow down the field. Thirdly, practice decision-making mindfulness. Once you've made a choice, consciously commit to it and resist the urge to constantly compare it to alternatives. Focus on the positive aspects of your chosen option and the reasons you selected it, rather than dwelling on the perceived benefits of the options you didn't choose. Embrace the idea that good enough is often perfect. Remember that the ultimate freedom is not having limitless options, but having the clarity to choose wisely and contentedly from a manageable few. The profound takeaway is this: more options don't always mean more happiness. Sometimes, true freedom lies in embracing good enough and letting go of the endless pursuit of best. Have you ever taken a sugar pill or received a sham treatment for an ailment? yet found your symptoms surprisingly improving, even though the medicine had no active ingredients. Or perhaps you've heard stories of people experiencing real pain relief or a boost in mood simply because they believed they were receiving a powerful new drug. This isn't just wishful thinking or imagination. It's one of the most remarkable demonstrations of the mind's profound influence over the body. It reveals that our beliefs, expectations, and the context of treatment can trigger real physiological changes, proving that sometimes the most potent medicine isn't what's in the pill, but what's in our heads. This astonishing phenomenon is known as the placebo effect. It refers to any physiological or psychological benefit or improvement in symptoms experienced by a patient following a treatment that is known to be inert or has no active therapeutic properties, simply because the patient believes it will work. The placebo itself could be a sugar pill, a saline injection, a sham surgery, or even a fake therapy. The effect demonstrates that the act of receiving care, the ritual of treatment, and particularly the patient's positive expectations about that treatment, can trigger the body's own healing mechanisms, producing real, measurable changes in health outcomes. From pain relief and reduced anxiety to improvements in conditions like Parkinson's disease or depression, the mechanism behind the placebo effect is multifaceted and involves a complex interplay of psychological and neurobiological factors. One primary driver is expectancy theory. If you expect a treatment to work, your brain can produce the same physiological responses that an active drug might elicit. For instance, expecting pain relief can trigger the release of the body's natural pain-killing chemicals, endorphins. Another key component is classical conditioning, the consistent pairing of a certain ritual, e.g., taking a pill. Visiting a doctor with a positive outcome can lead the body to respond positively even to an inert version of that ritual. Furthermore, reduced anxiety and stress play a significant role. The belief that one is receiving effective treatment can alleviate stress, which in turn can reduce symptom severity and boost the immune system. Finally, the human connection and care inherent in the therapeutic encounter itself contribute. Feeling heard, understood, and cared for by a medical professional can be a powerful healing force. The consequences of the placebo effect are profound, not just for medicine, but for understanding the mind-body connection. In clinical trials, understanding the placebo effect is crucial for determining the true efficacy of new drugs. Drugs must perform significantly better than placebo to be approved. For patients, it highlights the importance of optimism and a strong therapeutic relationship with caregivers. It reveals how our mindset and beliefs can profoundly influence our physical health and well-being, sometimes more powerfully than external interventions. It underscores the subjective nature of pain and other symptoms, demonstrating that our perception of a physical state is heavily mediated by our mental state. While it doesn't mean it's all in your head in a dismissive way, it affirms the head's incredible capacity to influence the body, emphasizing the holistic nature of health. So, how can you harness the power of the placebo effect in your own life for greater well-being? And critically, how do you avoid being misled by it? For personal benefit, cultivate positive expectations about treatments you genuinely receive. When taking prescribed medication or engaging in therapy, approach it with an open and hopeful mindset. This can amplify its actual effects. Engage in rituals of well-being that reinforce positive outcomes, whether it's a specific routine before bed, a pre-workout warm-up, or a mindfulness practice. These consistent actions, even if their direct physiological impact is small, can trigger beneficial placebo responses through conditioning and positive expectation. To avoid being misled, understand that while placebos can produce real symptom relief, they do not cure underlying diseases. Don't use the concept of the placebo effect to dismiss scientifically proven treatments for serious conditions. Always prioritize evidence-based medicine while simultaneously cultivating a positive and hopeful mindset. For critical thinking, be wary of anecdotal evidence for unproven remedies. Many positive testimonials could be attributed to a placebo response rather than the remedy's inherent efficacy. By consciously acknowledging the power of belief, you can strategically leverage your own mind to support your health and well-being, while maintaining a critical perspective on what truly constitutes effective treatment. The powerful takeaway is this: your beliefs are potent medicine. Harness optimism for healing, but ground your health in scientific truth. Have you ever found yourself liking a song that you initially disliked, simply because you heard it repeatedly on the radio? Or perhaps you've noticed that you feel more comfortable and trusting of people you see frequently, even if you've never had a deep conversation with them. This isn't just about habit or logical preference. It's a subtle yet powerful psychological phenomenon that demonstrates how mere repeated exposure to something, without any explicit reward or interaction, can significantly increase your liking for it. Our brains have a curious way of equating familiarity with safety and preference, making the known inherently more appealing than the unknown. This pervasive psychological phenomenon is known as the mere exposure effect. It describes the finding that people tend to develop a preference for things merely because they are familiar with them. The more often we are exposed to a novel stimulus, a person, a word, an object, a melody, an image, the more we tend to like it, provided that the initial reaction to the stimulus is not strongly negative. This effect occurs even without any conscious recognition of the repeated exposure and without any associated reward or positive reinforcement. It's a non-conscious, automatic process where familiarity subtly breeds comfort, and comfort breeds liking. The mechanism behind the mere exposure effect is primarily rooted in our brain's innate drive for safety and processing fluency. From an evolutionary perspective, familiar stimuli are generally safer and less threatening than novel ones. A familiar rustle in the bushes is less alarming than an unfamiliar one. Our brains therefore develop a preference for things that are easily processed and pose no immediate threat. When we repeatedly encounter a stimulus, our brain becomes more efficient at processing it. It requires less cognitive effort to recognize and respond to it. This increased processing fluency is inherently pleasurable, and this positive feeling is then misattributed as a positive affective response towards the stimulus itself. It's a non-conscious, if it's familiar, it must be good or safe heuristic that underlies many of our subtle preferences. The consequences of the mere exposure effect are far-reaching and can influence various aspects of your life, often without your awareness. In marketing and advertising, companies repeatedly expose you to their brand logos, jingles, and product images, not necessarily to convey information, but to build familiarity and subtly increase your liking for them. In social interactions, simply being physically present and regularly seen by others can increase your likability, even if you don't engage in extensive conversation. This effect plays a role in the formation of friendships and relationships, as geographical proximity and repeated encounters often lead to greater affection. In political campaigns, repeated exposure to a candidate's name or face can make them seem more trustworthy and preferable. It also explains why we often prefer the familiar over the novel, leading to a resistance to change or an attachment to outdated ideas simply because they are well known and comfortable. So, how can you strategically leverage the mere exposure effect for personal and professional advantage, or protect yourself from its subtle manipulations? For personal growth, if you want to develop a liking for something new, e.g., a healthier food, a new genre of music, a complex subject, expose yourself to it repeatedly in small, manageable doses. The initial resistance may lessen, and liking may grow over time. In social settings, simply increasing your polite, non-threatening presence can increase your general likability. If you want others to like your ideas, present them multiple times. Gradually, allowing familiarity to build before expecting full acceptance. To protect yourself from manipulation, especially in advertising or politics. Be aware that your preference for a brand or candidate might be based solely on how often you've been exposed to it, rather than on its actual merits. When making decisions, particularly significant ones, actively challenge your inherent preference for the familiar. Force yourself to critically evaluate the true quality, value, or benefits of options, rather than relying on your gut feeling of "I like it because I know it." Seek out novel experiences and ideas, pushing beyond the comfort zone of familiarity to truly expand your horizons and make choices based on informed judgment, not just subconscious preference. The powerful takeaway is this: familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort breeds liking. Wisely choose what you repeatedly expose your mind to. Section 19. The Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished business lingers. Have you ever started a project, gotten deeply engrossed in it, but then had to suddenly pause or interrupt your work for something else? And after the interruption, did you find that thoughts of that unfinished task kept nagging at you, popping into your mind persistently until you could return to it? Or perhaps you recall details of an incomplete task much more vividly than those of tasks you've already checked off your list. This isn't just about good intentions. It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon that reveals how our brains prioritize and hold on to uncompleted activities, often creating a persistent mental to-do list that constantly demands our attention, for better or worse. This intriguing cognitive bias is known as the Zeigarnik effect. It describes our tendency to remember unfinished or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. The core idea is that when a task is started but not completed, it creates a state of tension in our cognitive system. This tension keeps the task active in our minds, making it more salient and easier to recall than tasks where the tension has been released upon completion. It's as if our brain keeps an open loop for uncompleted tasks, persistently nudging us until that loop is closed, influencing our memory, attention, and even our motivation. The mechanism behind the Zeigarnik effect is linked to our brain's innate drive for closure and goal completion. When we set out to achieve a goal or complete a task, our cognitive system activates a task-specific tension. This tension acts like a mental reminder, keeping the goal active in our minds and making it more accessible to our memory. When the task is completed, this tension is released, and the task effectively fades from the forefront of our awareness, becoming less memorable than those still creating tension. This effect highlights how our memory isn't just a passive storage system. It's an active, goal-oriented process that prioritizes what still needs to be done. It's a built-in mechanism designed to ensure we follow through on our intentions. But it can also become a source of mental clutter if not managed effectively. The consequences of the Zeigarnik effect are significant and can impact your productivity, motivation, and mental well-being. On the positive side, it can be a powerful motivator, driving us to return to unfinished work and achieve completion. It's why cliffhangers in movies or TV shows are so effective. They create an unfinished loop that compels us to keep watching. In learning, teachers sometimes use it by interrupting a lesson with a question, knowing that the students' minds will continue to chew on the problem. However, the negative side is equally potent. It contributes to mental clutter and stress, as a multitude of unfinished tasks can lead to a constant stream of nagging thoughts, making it hard to relax or focus on new things. It explains why we might lie awake at night thinking about work we didn't finish, or why procrastination often leaves us feeling mentally burdened rather than relieved. It can also lead to a perception of being perpetually busy, even when not actively working, simply because of the mental load of incomplete tasks. So how can you strategically leverage the Zeigarnik effect to boost your productivity? And more importantly, how can you prevent it from creating undue mental stress to harness it if you're struggling to start a task? Try the 5-minute rule. Commit to working on it for just 5 minutes. The act of starting, even if brief, can create the Zeigarnik tension that will make it harder to abandon and easier to return to later. When facing a large project, break it into smaller, manageable subtasks. Completing each subtask provides small releases of tension and a sense of progress. To manage mental clutter and reduce stress, the key is to offload unfinished tasks from your working memory. Simply writing down your to-do list, even if you don't complete the tasks immediately, has been shown to reduce the Zeigarnik effect. The act of externalizing the task onto paper or a digital list signals to your brain that the loop is being managed, releasing some of the cognitive tension. This allows your mind to relax and focus on the present moment, knowing that the task is stored and won't be forgotten. Prioritize ruthlessly and avoid starting too many things simultaneously. As each uncompleted task adds to your mental burden, the profound takeaway is this: your mind remembers what it needs to finish. Offload your tasks to free your focus and quiet your mental noise. Have you ever seen an advertisement for a limited time offer or a product described as only a few left in stock, and suddenly felt an intense urge to buy it, even if you weren't particularly interested before? Or perhaps you value something more highly simply because it's rare, exclusive, or difficult to obtain. This isn't just shrewd marketing, it's a deep-seated psychological trigger that preys on our fear of missing out and our inherent tendency to equate limited availability with higher value. Our minds are strangely wired to desire things more intensely when they are perceived as scarce, often leading us to make impulsive decisions that we might otherwise regret. This powerful principle of influence is known as the scarcity principle. It states that opportunities seem more valuable to us when their availability is limited. When something is scarce, we perceive it as being of higher quality, more desirable, or more potent. The threat of losing an opportunity or missing out on a valuable item triggers a strong emotional response, activating our primal fear of deprivation. This isn't a rational assessment of intrinsic worth. It's an automatic psychological reaction where perceived scarcity creates a sense of urgency and desirability, often making us want something more simply because we might not be able to have it. The mechanism behind the scarcity principle is primarily rooted in two psychological drives: reactance and social proof. When something becomes scarce, our perceived freedom to obtain it is threatened. This triggers psychological reactance, a strong negative emotional response to perceived threats to our freedoms, which motivates us to reassert that freedom by acquiring the scarce item. We desire it more because it might be taken away. Additionally, its scarcity often implies social proof. If something is limited, it suggests that many other people must want it, which in turn makes us believe it must be good or valuable. If everyone is rushing to get it, there must be a good reason, right? Our brains take the shortcut of inferring value from demand, and limited availability signals high demand. This combination of threatened freedom and implied social validation creates a potent psychological cocktail that makes us act quickly and often irrationally. The consequences of the scarcity principle are pervasive in consumer behavior, negotiation, and even social dynamics. In sales, techniques like limited stock, flash sales, one-day only offers, and countdown timers are explicitly designed to exploit this principle. Real estate agents might tell you another offer just came in to create urgency. Collectibles, rare art, and limited edition items command higher prices simply due to their perceived scarcity, not necessarily their utility. In relationships, the hard-to-get strategy sometimes works because it subtly implies scarcity and increases perceived value. Politically, campaigns use "this is our last chance" messaging to rally support. While it can motivate action, it can also lead to impulsive purchases, poor financial decisions, and a general feeling of anxiety about missing out, driving us to acquire things we don't truly need or value once the scarcity is removed. So, how can you become aware of the scarcity principle's influence and protect yourself from its manipulative power, or even use it ethically to protect yourself? The key is to pause and ask, why do I want this? When confronted with a limited time or limited stock offer, consciously separate the urgency created by scarcity from the intrinsic value of the item. Ask yourself, would I want this item just as much if it were available indefinitely and in abundance? Focus on the actual utility and benefit of the product or opportunity rather than its perceived exclusivity. Challenge the assumption that limited supply automatically equates to high quality. Sometimes it's just a marketing gimmick. For ethical application, if you genuinely have a limited supply of something valuable, e.g., a unique skill, a truly limited product, or a time slot, clearly communicate that scarcity as a factual matter. But avoid creating false urgency or implying that limited availability means superior quality if it doesn't. Emphasize the unique benefit of what you offer rather than solely relying on fear of missing out. By cultivating a discerning eye for true value over perceived urgency, you empower yourself to make rational choices, free from the manipulative grip of scarcity. The powerful takeaway is this: true value isn't defined by scarcity. Question urgency and choose wisely based on genuine need, not manufactured demand. Have you ever been walking down a street and seen a long queue outside a restaurant you've never heard of, and immediately thought, that must be a great place to eat, even without knowing anything about the food? Or perhaps you've been unsure about a decision, only to feel more confident once you see many other people making the same choice. This isn't just a simple observation. It's a powerful psychological principle that demonstrates our inherent tendency to look to the actions and behaviors of others, especially when we're uncertain, to determine what is correct, appropriate, or desirable. We often assume that if many people are doing something, it must be the right thing to do, leading us to follow the crowd, sometimes blindly. This influential principle is known as social proof. It's a psychological phenomenon where people assume the actions of others in an attempt to reflect correct behavior for a given situation. Essentially, we determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. The greater the number of people who find any idea correct, the more the idea will be correct. This shortcut is particularly potent when we are uncertain about a situation, or when the individuals acting are perceived as similar to ourselves or as experts. It's a powerful driver of conformity, making us feel validated and safe in our choices if others are making them too. The mechanism behind social proof is rooted in our fundamental need for efficiency and validation in an uncertain world. Our brains are constantly seeking shortcuts to navigate complex social situations and make quick decisions. If many people are doing something, it's often a good heuristic for what's safe or effective. From an evolutionary perspective, following the group often provided safety and access to collective wisdom. in ambiguous situations when we don't know how to act. Looking to others provides valuable cues and reduces cognitive load. Furthermore, there's a strong desire for social acceptance and belonging. Conforming to group behavior helps us fit in and avoid potential social rejection. This desire for validation often overrides rational individual assessment, leading us to adopt beliefs or behaviors simply because they are popular. Even if they aren't optimal, the consequences of social proof are widespread and can be seen in almost every aspect of society, both positively and negatively. In marketing, it's pervasive best-selling, most popular, customer testimonials, celebrity endorsements, and influencer marketing all leverage social proof. On websites, X people are viewing this item or Y people bought this are designed to create urgency and validation. In social situations, it explains fashion trends, viral content, and why certain behaviors like tipping or applause become norms. In emergencies, it can contribute to the bystander effect, where inaction by others signals that no help is needed. On the darker side, it can lead to mob mentality, cult behavior, and the rapid spread of misinformation, where people believe or act upon false information simply because everyone else seems to. It hinders critical thinking and encourages conformity, sometimes leading individuals to abandon their own judgment in favor of collective opinion. So, how can you become aware of social proof's powerful influence and leverage it ethically, or protect yourself from its manipulative dark side? To protect yourself, the key is to consciously question the crowd. When you feel an urge to conform or buy something because everyone else is doing it, pause and ask, is this genuinely the right choice for me? What are the objective merits of this, independent of what others are doing? Seek out information from diverse sources, not just those that confirm the popular opinion. Develop your own internal compass for decision-making, rather than relying solely on external validation. When many people are doing something, consider if it's based on independent thought or just another instance of social proof. For ethical application, if you genuinely have a good product, service, or idea, you can use real, authentic testimonials or data about its popularity to provide legitimate social proof, encourage authentic reviews, and share success stories. In leadership, demonstrate desired behaviors yourself, knowing that your actions can serve as social proof for others. By cultivating independent thought and critically evaluating the wisdom of the crowds, you empower yourself to make truly informed choices rather than simply following the flock. The powerful takeaway is this: the crowd isn't always right. Cultivate independent judgment to avoid blindly following the path of others. Section 22. Anchoring bias in decision-making, the initial hook. Have you ever walked into a negotiation for a new car or a house, and the very first price mentioned, even if it seemed outrageously high, stuck in your mind and influenced every subsequent offer and counteroffer? Or perhaps you've considered a product on sale, and the original, much higher price, even crossed out, made the discounted price seem incredibly reasonable, leading you to purchase something you might not have otherwise. This isn't just a clever sales tactic. It's a powerful and subtle cognitive bias that demonstrates how your mind latches onto the very first piece of information it encounters, using it as an anchor that disproportionately shapes all subsequent judgments and estimations, often pulling your final decision far off course. This pervasive cognitive shortcut is known as the anchoring bias in decision-making. It is our tendency to rely too heavily on an initial piece of information, the anchor, when making decisions, especially when faced with uncertainty or ambiguous information. Once this initial anchor is established, our minds tend to adjust our subsequent judgments relative to that anchor, even if the anchor itself is arbitrary, irrelevant, or obviously extreme. The problem is that these adjustments are almost always insufficient, meaning our final estimates or decisions remain unduly biased towards the initial anchoring point. It's as if the first number or idea encountered sets a mental gravitational pull, making it difficult to move too far away from it. Even with new information, the mechanism behind anchoring bias is multifaceted and deeply ingrained in how our brains process information. When confronted with an estimation or decision where we lack precise knowledge, our brain seeks a starting point, a reference. The first piece of information available often becomes this initial reference point. From there, our minds engage in a process of anchoring and adjustment. We try to adjust our estimate or decision away from the anchor, but this adjustment process is typically inadequate. We stop adjusting once we reach a range we consider plausible, even if that range is still significantly influenced by the original anchor. Furthermore, anchors can subtly prime our minds. A high anchor might cause us to retrieve information consistent with higher values, making those seem more likely. This happens largely unconsciously. Even when we know an anchor is irrelevant, our brain still struggles to completely ignore its pull, demonstrating the automatic and pervasive nature of this cognitive shortcut. The consequences of the anchoring bias are profound, influencing our judgments and decisions in various domains. In negotiations, the party that makes the first offer often gains a significant advantage by setting the anchor for the entire discussion. In pricing, retailers strategically display higher list prices or manufacturer-suggested retail prices next to sale prices to make the discount seem more appealing. In legal contexts, the initial demand for damages can significantly influence jury awards. For personal finance, it can lead to overpaying for goods or services if your initial expectation was anchored too high. In self-assessment, an initial positive or negative label can anchor your perception of your own abilities, making it difficult to objectively evaluate growth or areas for improvement. This bias fundamentally distorts our objective valuation and can lead to economically irrational or personally suboptimal outcomes, simply because our brains latched onto an irrelevant starting point. So, how can you identify and counteract the powerful grip of the anchoring bias, both to make more rational decisions yourself and to avoid being manipulated by others? The most critical strategy is pre-computation and independent research. Before entering any situation where an anchor might be set like a negotiation or a significant purchase, do your own thorough research to establish your own independent objective value or realistic range before any numbers are introduced by others. This creates your own internal counter-anchor. When an anchor is presented, actively question its relevance and validity. Is this number arbitrary? What is its true basis? To loosen the anchor's grip, consider extreme possibilities or values that are far removed from the anchor, which can help expand your mental framework. In a negotiation, if someone sets an unfavorably high anchor, you can explicitly acknowledge it and then immediately re-anchor with a more realistic figure, clearly justifying your own number with strong reasoning. This shifts the focus and attempts to set a new, more favorable anchor. By consciously detaching your judgment from initial, often arbitrary, reference points and relying on your own independent assessment, you empower yourself to make truly objective and value-driven decisions. The powerful takeaway is this: the first number is not the true number. Break free from its grip by independently valuing your choices before any anchor is cast. Section 23. The Hawthorne Effect: Observing Changes Behavior. Have you ever noticed how your productivity or behavior might subtly shift when you know you're being watched? Even if it's just by your boss walking by, or when you're participating in a study. Perhaps you're more careful, more diligent, or even more enthusiastic, simply because you're aware of the observation. This isn't necessarily about deliberate deception. It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon that demonstrates how the very act of being observed, or knowing that one is part of an experiment or special group, can lead to a temporary alteration in behavior, independent of any specific intervention or treatment. It reveals a surprising truth: simply paying attention to people can change how they perform, sometimes profoundly. This intriguing psychological phenomenon is known as the Hawthorne effect. It refers to a type of reactivity in which individuals modify an aspect of their behavior in response to their awareness of being observed. The effect was first identified during a series of experiments conducted at the Hawthorne Works, an electric company, in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Researchers found that simply making changes to working conditions, like lighting or break times, often led to increased productivity. Regardless of the direction of the change, dimming lights could increase productivity just as much as brightening them. The key insight was that the improvements were not due to the specific changes themselves, but because the workers felt singled out, valued, and paid attention to by the researchers. Their awareness of being part of a study and receiving special attention was the primary driver of their behavioral modification. The mechanism behind the Hawthorne effect is primarily linked to increased attention, perceived special treatment, and a heightened sense of self-awareness. When individuals know they are being observed or are part of a study, they feel more important and valued. This can lead to a greater effort, increased motivation, and a desire to perform well or cooperate with the perceived goals of the observers' experimenters. They might subconsciously strive to meet perceived expectations, or simply behave in a way they believe is expected or desirable for someone under observation. The act of observation itself can trigger a temporary shift in focus, encouraging individuals to pay more attention to their own performance and modify it accordingly, leading to behavioral changes that wouldn't otherwise occur. It highlights how the social context of an interaction can be a powerful, often overlooked, variable. The consequences of the Hawthorne effect are significant, especially in research, management, and personal development. In scientific research, particularly in social sciences and medicine, it poses a challenge to establishing causality. Observed changes might be due to the effect of being in the study rather than the independent variable being tested. This is why control groups and double-blind studies are crucial. In management, it means that new initiatives or performance monitoring might initially boost productivity, but the long-term effects might diminish once the novelty of the attention wears off. It explains why employee engagement programs often see an initial surge in morale. In personal growth, if you're trying to establish a new habit or improve a skill, simply tracking your progress or having an accountability partner can provide an observational boost, making you more likely to stick with it. While it can lead to temporary boosts, relying solely on observation without genuine systemic changes can lead to unsustainable improvements and mask underlying issues. So, how can you effectively leverage the Hawthorne effect for positive change while understanding its limitations? And how can you protect yourself from misinterpreting observed behavior for positive change? If you're trying to establish a new habit or improve a skill, consciously implement an element of self-observation or accountability. Track your progress, tell a friend about your goals, or simply be more mindful of your own actions. The act of watching yourself can increase your focus and motivation. In leadership, regular, genuine check-ins and showing employees that their work is noticed and valued can provide a continuous Hawthorne boost. But understand that true sustainable improvement requires deeper systemic support and development. To protect yourself from misinterpretation, especially when evaluating performance or research data, Always consider whether observed changes might be due to the act of observation itself. In research, look for studies that account for this effect. In everyday life, understand that people might behave differently when they know they are being evaluated. Seek to observe behavior in natural, unobserved contexts to gain a more authentic understanding. The key is to recognize that attention is a powerful catalyst, but true change often requires more than just being seen. The powerful takeaway is this: attention is a powerful catalyst. Recognize how observation shapes behavior, both yours and others. Section 24, Emotional Contagion, Catching Feelings from Others. Have you ever walked into a room where someone was incredibly agitated or anxious, and within moments, found yourself feeling a subtle tightening in your own chest, or a rise in your own stress levels, even if you weren't aware of why? Or perhaps you've been in a group where one person's laughter became infectious, quickly spreading joy and mirth to everyone present. This isn't just about empathy or conscious understanding, it's a raw, almost primal form of social influence, demonstrating how emotions like a virus can spread rapidly and unconsciously from one person to another, powerfully shaping our own internal states and reactions. This fascinating and pervasive psychological phenomenon is known as emotional contagion. It is the tendency to feel and express emotions similar to and synchronized with those of others. It involves a rapid, automatic, and often unconscious process where individuals catch the emotions of those around them, mirroring their facial expressions, vocal tones, postures, and other nonverbal cues. This mirroring can then trigger the corresponding emotional state within oneself. It's a primitive form of social communication and bonding, allowing us to quickly align our emotional states with others. But it also means we are constantly absorbing and transmitting feelings, often without realizing it. The mechanism behind emotional contagion is deeply rooted in our neurobiology, particularly the concept of mirror neurons. These specialized brain cells fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action, creating a neural basis for imitation and empathy. When we see someone smile, our own facial muscles may subtly mimic that smile, which in turn can trigger feelings of happiness. Similarly, seeing someone grimace in pain can activate pain-related areas in our own brains. This automatic mimicry, often below conscious awareness, provides rapid feedback to our brains, generating the corresponding emotion. It's a highly efficient system for social coordination and understanding, allowing us to quickly feel what others are feeling, fostering empathy and group cohesion. However, it also makes us highly susceptible to the emotional states of those in our immediate environment. Whether those emotions are positive or negative, the consequences of emotional contagion are far-reaching, impacting personal well-being, group dynamics, and societal moods. On the positive side, it explains how joy, enthusiasm, and optimism can spread through a team, making collective work more enjoyable and productive. It's the basis of effective public speaking, where a speaker's passion can genuinely inspire an audience. In personal relationships, it fosters empathy and connection, allowing us to truly resonate with a loved one's happiness or sorrow. However, the negative implications are equally potent. Stress, anxiety, anger, and fear can also be highly contagious. Working in a perpetually stressed environment can unknowingly elevate your own stress levels. Being around pessimistic individuals can subtly drag down your mood. It can contribute to collective panic in a crisis, or escalate arguments as one person's anger fuels another's. It means that the emotional landscape of your social environment directly influences your own internal emotional state, often without your explicit consent or awareness. So, How can you become more aware of emotional contagion's powerful influence and manage its impact on your own emotional well-being? The first step is mindful self-awareness. Regularly check in with your own emotional state, especially after interacting with others. Ask yourself, am I truly feeling this emotion, or did I just pick it up from someone else? Recognize that emotional shifts might not always originate internally. To protect yourself from negative contagion, practice emotional detachment when necessary. If you encounter someone highly agitated, consciously create a mental boundary. Acknowledge their emotion without fully absorbing it yourself. Focus on regulating your own breathing and posture to counteract unconscious mimicry. Strategically choose your environment and who you spend time with, gravitating towards individuals who consistently radiate positive, uplifting emotions. For harnessing positive contagion, consciously express positive emotions, smiles, enthusiasm, calm to subtly influence the emotional atmosphere around you. Be the person who brings good energy into a room, knowing that your emotional state is a powerful, silent communicator that can uplift others. By understanding that emotions are catching, you gain the power to filter what you absorb and consciously contribute to the emotional climate of your interactions. The profound takeaway is this: emotions are catching. Guard your inner world from negativity and consciously radiate the feelings you wish to receive. Section 25, False Consensus Effect. Everyone thinks like me. Have you ever been absolutely certain that your friends or colleagues would agree with your opinion on a particular topic, only to be genuinely surprised when they held a completely different view? Or perhaps you've made a decision, assuming it was the most rational and obvious choice, and couldn't fathom why anyone would do otherwise. This isn't just a misjudgment of individual opinions, it's a deep-seated cognitive bias that leads us to believe that our own beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors are far more common and typical than they actually are. We subtly project our internal world onto others, creating an inflated sense of shared reality that can lead to miscommunication, conflict, and a distorted view of public opinion. This pervasive cognitive bias is known as the false consensus effect. It is our tendency to overestimate the extent to which others share our beliefs, attitudes, values, and behaviors. We assume that our own way of thinking and acting is the norm, and that anyone who thinks or acts differently is somehow unusual or misguided. This means we tend to believe that more people agree with us than actually do, and that our own choices are more common or more correct than they are in reality. This bias isn't born of malice, but from a natural human inclination to seek validation and simplify the complexities of social perception. The mechanism behind the false consensus effect is multifaceted. Firstly, it's partly due to the availability heuristic which we discussed earlier. Our own beliefs and experiences are the most readily available and salient information in our minds. When asked to estimate others' opinions, we naturally use our own as a starting point, and then make insufficient adjustments. Secondly, selective exposure and social networks play a significant role. We tend to associate with people who are similar to us, who share our values and perspectives. Our immediate social circle becomes an echo chamber, reinforcing the idea that everyone thinks like me. We are literally surrounded by people who often do agree with us, so we mistakenly generalize that to the wider population. Thirdly, it's driven by a desire for social validation and self-enhancement. Believing that our views are widely shared makes us feel more normal, correct, and confident in our own opinions, boosting our self-esteem. It's a comforting thought that our reality is shared by the majority. The consequences of the false consensus effect are widespread, impacting personal relationships, group decision-making, and societal understanding. In personal relationships, It can lead to frustration and misunderstandings when we assume our partner or friend should have known or would have agreed with us, simply because we thought it was obvious. In professional settings, managers might overestimate employee consensus on a new policy, leading to implementation challenges. In marketing, companies might mistakenly believe their target audience shares their enthusiasm for a product. Politically, it can lead to an underestimation of opposing viewpoints and an overestimation of one's own support, fueling polarization and making productive dialogue difficult. It also contributes to the illusion of transparency, where we believe our internal states are more obvious to others than they actually are, leading to communication breakdowns. Ultimately, it hinders empathy and accurate social prediction, making us less adept at navigating diverse perspectives. So, how can you become aware of the false consensus effect and prevent it from skewing your perceptions and interactions, allowing for more realistic social understanding? The first and most crucial step is conscious recognition. Acknowledge that your beliefs are not universally shared, no matter how self-evident they seem to you. Actively seek out diverse perspectives and sources of information that challenge your assumptions. Make a conscious effort to interact with people from different backgrounds, viewpoints, and social circles than your own. When trying to gauge public opinion or group consensus, resist the urge to project your own views. Instead, use active listening and open-ended questions to genuinely solicit others' opinions without bias. In group settings, explicitly encourage dissenting opinions and create a safe space for people to express views that might run contrary to the perceived majority. For self-protection, if you ever feel utterly bewildered by someone else's opinion or decision, immediately consider the false consensus effect. Chances are, their reality and social circle have shaped their views differently from yours. By regularly challenging your assumption that everyone thinks like me, you can cultivate greater empathy, improve communication, and gain a more accurate and nuanced understanding of the diverse tapestry of human thought. The profound takeaway is this: your world is not everyone's world. Actively seek diverse perspectives to truly understand the vastness of human thought. Section 26. Rosy Retrospection. Remembering the good times. Have you ever looked back on a past vacation that, at the time, was fraught with travel delays, arguments, and unexpected expenses, but now you only remember the beautiful sunsets, delicious meals, and laughter? Or perhaps you recall a challenging period of your life, like college exams or a demanding project, with a strange sense of fondness, forgetting the stress and sleepless nights, and only cherishing the camaraderie or the sense of accomplishment. This isn't just selective memory, it's a fascinating and often comforting cognitive bias that makes us filter our past, softening the rough edges and polishing the pleasant memories, leaving us with a sunnier, more idealized version of what actually happened. This common cognitive bias is known as rosy retrospection. It is our tendency to recall past events more positively than they were actually experienced at the time. Essentially, we tend to romanticize the past, downplaying or forgetting the negative aspects of an experience while amplifying the positive ones. This effect is particularly strong for emotionally significant events like vacations, holidays, or challenging but ultimately successful projects. It leads to a perception that the good old days were always better than the present, and that past struggles were somehow more manageable or even enjoyable in retrospect. It's a comforting mental trick that helps us maintain a positive outlook on our personal history. The mechanism behind rosy retrospection is primarily linked to our brain's desire for emotional regulation and self-protection. Firstly, negative emotions associated with past events tend to fade faster than positive ones. Our memories are not perfect recordings, they are reconstructive, and over time, the sharp edges of unpleasantness dull, while the more robust positive associations remain or are even strengthened. This allows us to move on from negative experiences without being constantly burdened by them. Secondly, there's a drive for cognitive consistency and a positive self-narrative. By remembering the past more positively, we create a more coherent and pleasant personal story, which contributes to our overall well-being and reduces potential regret about past decisions or experiences. It's a form of selective attention and rehearsal where pleasant memories are replayed and reinforced, while unpleasant ones are less frequently accessed and thus weaken over time. Our mind helps us to feel good about our life trajectory by accentuating the positive. The consequences of rosy retrospection are pervasive, influencing our emotional well-being, decision-making, and even our societal perceptions. On the positive side, it can contribute to resilience, allowing us to overcome past hardships and find meaning in challenges. It enhances nostalgia and contributes to a general sense of contentment with our life journey. However, it can also lead to an unrealistic idealization of the past, making us less satisfied with the present. We might constantly compare current experiences to a rosier, idealized version of past ones, leading to disappointment. In decision-making, it can lead us to repeat mistakes, as we might forget the true difficulties of past ventures and embark on similar ones with unfounded optimism. It contributes to the myth of the good old days in broader societal narratives, sometimes hindering progress by fostering a resistance to change based on an overly romanticized view of history. It means we might constantly be chasing an imagined past, rather than appreciating the present for what it is. So, how can you become aware of rosy retrospection's influence and use it for well-being, while avoiding its potential pitfalls of unrealistic expectations? To harness its positive aspects, deliberately engage in mindful, positive reminiscing. Actively recall and savor the truly good moments from your past, allowing yourself to feel the pleasant emotions associated with them. This can boost your mood and resilience. When facing current challenges, remember past difficulties that you overcame, but focus on the lessons learned in your growth rather than just the simplified good outcome. To counteract its potential to mislead, practice realistic self-reflection on past events. When you find yourself romanticizing a past experience, gently remind yourself of the full spectrum of emotions and challenges that were present at the time. Keep a journal to record both the highs and lows of experiences as they happen, providing a more balanced account for future review. Before repeating a past endeavor, review objective details, not just your rosily filtered memories, to ensure you don't overlook real challenges. By consciously embracing a balanced view of your past, acknowledging both the joys and the struggles, you can appreciate your journey more fully. Learn from your experiences and cultivate a realistic contentment with your present reality. The profound takeaway is this: the past shines brightest in memory. Cherish the good, but remember the full truth for wisdom and growth. We've embarked on an incredible journey together, delving into 25 profound truths about human psychology, peeling back the layers of perception to reveal the hidden forces that shape our every thought, feeling, and action. From the subtle self-consciousness of the spotlight effect to the comforting but often misleading glow of rosy retrospection, we've uncovered how your mind often operates on fascinating, sometimes counterintuitive, principles. We've seen how your memory plays tricks with the primacy and recency effects, how your beliefs can become unshakable due to confirmation bias and the backfire effect, and how even the presence of others can alter your willingness to help, thanks to the bystander effect. You've learned about the powerful sway of anchoring bias and loss aversion in your decisions, the perils of the sunk cost fallacy, and the surprising confidence born from the Dunning-Kruger effect. We've explored the constant quest for internal harmony driven by cognitive dissonance, the pervasive us versus them mentality of in-group, out-group bias, and the overwhelming nature of too much choice and the paradox of choice. You now understand the incredible healing power of your own belief through the placebo effect, the subtle influence of familiarity with the mere exposure effect, and the nagging persistence of unfinished tasks thanks to the Zeigarnik effect. We've unmasked the manufactured urgency of the scarcity principle, the power of conformity and social proof, and the surprising contagiousness of emotions. Finally, you've grasped how easily we project our own thoughts onto others with the false consensus effect. This isn't just a collection of interesting facts. It's a toolkit for life. Each truth offers a profound revelation, empowering you to better understand not just others, but fundamentally, yourself. By recognizing these built-in psychological patterns, you can gain incredible control over your reactions, make more conscious and effective decisions, and navigate the social world with greater insight and empathy. You can defend against manipulation, cultivate healthier habits, improve your communication, and build stronger, more authentic relationships. This knowledge is about shifting from a passive recipient of your mental processes to an active participant, consciously shaping your internal landscape and external interactions. The true value lies not just in knowing these truths, but in applying them. Begin to observe these phenomena in your daily life, in your own thoughts, in conversations, in media, and in the world around you. This conscious practice will deepen your understanding and solidify these insights into actionable wisdom. Your mind is an extraordinary instrument, and with this newfound awareness, you are now better equipped to play it beautifully. Embrace this awakened perspective and let it be the catalyst for profound personal growth, enabling you to live a life of greater awareness, intentionality, and authentic connection. The journey of self-discovery never truly ends. But today, you've taken a monumental leap forward, unlocking secrets that will forever change how you perceive yourself and the incredible human experience. As our journey through the hidden chambers of the human mind draws to a close, take a moment to simply breathe. Let these insights settle within you, not as heavy academic facts, but as gentle ripples of new understanding. You've just explored the very fabric of your own being, glimpsing the intricate dance between thought, emotion, and behavior. This isn't about becoming perfect, or about constantly dissecting every reaction. It's about cultivating a deeper, more compassionate awareness for yourself and for every other person you encounter. Think of these 25 truths as subtle lenses through which to view your world. They invite you to pause, to question, and to truly see. The next time you feel that pang of self-consciousness, remember the spotlight effect and gently remind yourself that others are likely wrapped up in their own worlds. When an old belief feels stubbornly right, recall confirmation bias and playfully seek out a different perspective. This newfound knowledge isn't a burden. It's an invitation to greater freedom. Freedom from unconscious biases, freedom to choose your responses, and freedom to connect with others on a more authentic level. Carry these truths not as rules, but as whispers of wisdom, guiding you toward a more intentional and empathetic existence. The conversation with yourself and the world has just begun.